Hello, welcome to the Carolina Justice Report. I am Rainee Romero, chatting with attorneys Sarah Austin and Amy Lawrence. Today we're chatting all about civil rights that you may not know about. So ladies, you know, when we talk about civil rights, I think the first thing that pops into my head is a lot of racism things, but really this can be other things. What are other civil rights we may not know about?
Yeah, we always think of Martin Luther King.
Right, yeah.
Right, no, absolutely. And that's part of it for sure. But, you know, we're looking at, did the government violate someone's civil rights? And in those cases, you know, let me preface this whole conversation with, you know, I also do criminal defense, and I love good police officers. Mm-hmm. They are some of my best friends, and good police officers love me. They do.
Yeah.
Because I shine a light when there's a bad one.
Right.
And so, and I think I've said this before, you know, and Chris Rock said it best, you can't have bad apples that are police officers. Because,
That's true.
You know, when you put a gun in someone's hand and they have to make a split-second decision, you can't have a bad apple. Mm-hmm. Just like we can't have a bad apple with pilots, right? Can't say he had a bad day.
Yep.
Took a whole plane down with him. So, you know, and the best thing I tell people is, you know, police officers need more education. Mm-hmm. They need more training. And when they get more training and more education, then it's just better for everybody.
Right. Right.
But we love good cops. Bad cops, not so much. There's nothing I hate worse than a bad cop. And good cops will tell you the same thing. The one thing they hate the most is a bad cop. But in these cases, we're usually talking about some kind of police misconduct.
Okay.
We're talking about jail misconduct cases, jail suicides, jail assaults, police rape, and abusive and excessive force cases. Mm-hmm. You know, we've all seen you know, Sean King's videos on Facebook where it shows, you know, a young black man who's being shot
Right.
for essentially nothing. You know, we see the case down in Charleston, the Slager case, where he shoots a black man in the back and kills him. Mm-hmm. These are the kind of cases we're talking about. And there's nothing that like gets me all riled up and ready to like choke people out and sue them and do everything we can to stop this kind of nonsense.
Right. Right, because you're placed in a position of leadership, right?
Yeah.
And you're expected for the cop to do the right thing. So
we're supposed to be the best of the best. You know, I include lawyers in that too, and doctors. Like, we're supposed to protect people. And when I see this abuse of power shift, and it's usually, and the more I see it, it's like when I see cops in fatigues, it makes me so mad. Right? The militarization of cops, because they're supposed to protect and serve. And instead, they're given this.
And I think it makes them more scary, too, to see them like they're a military, when really the cops I know and the cops we love, and we depend on cops in the civil, you know, in our car accidents and DUI cases and stuff like that to do the investigation. So we work closely with them all the time. And, you know, it's when you talk to people who sometimes are scared to call the police when they're in trouble, and you're like, well, why were you scared? That's when the civil rights stuff comes in, and when they look scary and they're fatigues and stuff like that, when you should just be able to call them and say, I need help, and those are the people that come and help you.
Right.
Yeah. They should be. They should never add to the pain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we see that. You know, one of the biggest cases in my career has been an Horry County case, Horry County Police Department case, where it's been going on for years, 6 years. And matter of fact, we go to trial May 2nd in federal court in Columbia on the last two cases. I represented many women who were sexually assaulted by a police officer.
I think it's important because we talked about, you know, you think civil rights and you think about racism and you know, Black Lives Matter and what's going on with Black men and Black women getting shot by the police, but it's not just that, it's also women.
Right.
And Amy does a lot of that.
Well,
Yeah.
and how does that even happen? Is the police officer there alone? They don't have their
So in this particular
partner?
case, these women were sexually assaulted, and the officer and investigator that was tasked with investigating these sexual assault cases,
Gotcha.
unfounded the case, said there was no case there, even though there was, and never went after the perpetrator, and then ended up re-victimizing those victims and sexually assaulting them.
Multiple.
Oh, there's
More that wanted to come forward, I think.
we have so many women that called me and they said, it makes me cry when I think about it. They said, I don't, they were outside the statute of limitations, but they didn't even want to sue. They didn't want anybody to even know. And they said, I want you to know that those women were telling the truth, and this is my story. And I've spent many an afternoon sobbing with women, and hearing their stories of what has happened to them.
Yeah.
Because this guy was a monster.
And I think, and he was a monster, and a bad apple is not even that doesn't do him justice. But I guess in the civil rights cases, what we're looking for is, how did this bad apple get through the system for so long? Like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Because you talk to most cops and they'd be like, I would never be able to do that. I would never be able to get away with that.
How did they pull this kind of stuff off?
How did he pull this off, and how can we prevent it from happening again?
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that really just breaks my heart and makes me just want to not kill people, but kill people. Because you see all the red flags for these departments, and then they constantly are turning their head to it, right? They're constantly being put on notice, that's what we're always looking for these cases.
It's common in a lot of the shooting cases you hear about too, where this police officer had a record of sort of being unhinged at almost every single traffic stop, and then this happens. It's like, why was there nothing in place to take a step back to send him for more training to fire him?
Yeah.
And then even when they find out, and instead of falling on the sword and saying, look, we failed at every level here, and I am so sorry, but this is what we're going to do to fix it. And instead you have indignancy, and we didn't do anything wrong, and then nothing changes. And you know what happens when nothing changes? Nothing changes.
You see the good cops sort of getting backlash or getting fired or moved to a desk job for speaking up against seeing a bad cop do something bad. And I think I would like to see a system, and that's why we take these kind of cases, is to give the good cops a voice where they can say, hey, I saw this happening and it's messed up, and know that they're not going to get demoted or fired, and this bad cop just gets to reign on, like happened in our case that's going to trial coming up.
And we see it in most cases that we're looking at this, is that somebody spoke out and they paid a price for it.
Right. So with police misconduct, and I ask this just because I don't really know, is that always a physical misconduct, or is there another kind of misconduct?
It's usually physical. It's usually that they've abused their power in some way, whether it's sexual or hitting. And one of the things we look at in these kind of cases is, was there this malicious, and this is what I'm looking for, because I know their lack of training, right? So I'm always looking, was this a malicious thing, right? Are you kicking a black man who's handcuffed on the floor in the head? That would be malicious.
Right.
Or did you do something and nothing like that, but did you do something and it was just because you didn't know any better?
Right.
Because no one ever told you. And so I'm constantly, and I think that police officers are a lot more apt to listen to me, and because I pull them aside and I tell them, look, I didn't know these things before, but I want you to know them, because if you don't know any better, you can't do any better.
Right.
And so if I tell you and I kind of educate them and inform them, I think it's because I'm a woman that they probably take it a lot easier. I think if Justin, looked at him and said, hey, you're doing this wrong, I'd probably have a different reaction. But they know it's coming from a place of love. And I also will print off I have pocket constitutions in my bag that I'll give police officers sometimes, because you'll be surprised they've never read it, which is just mind blowing to me. And no one asked them to, right?
Right.
They didn't know any better.
It wasn't a requirement.
Right, it wasn't a requirement. And I'll have case law, I've had a kid that was, or a lady that was, it was a female kid, and by kid I mean 20, who said F the police, something like that. And they were arrested for breach of peace, disorderly conduct, something like that. And there's case law in point that says that's freedom of speech.
Right.
You can't, as long as they don't incite violence, there's these rules behind it, you can say whatever you want to the police. And while it's not kind, and it's not respectful, it's not illegal.
Right.
And so I pull those police officers aside and say, hey, I'm really sorry that this happened to you, and that was not kind or respectful, but it's not illegal. And this is why. And here's the case. I'll have a little packet for them. That way that I'm telling you the truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That I have all the facts to back it up. And they're really appreciative when I do that.
Yeah.
Because I said, this is your livelihood. You have a family that you have to feed and put a roof over their head. And I know that you want to be protected, and the more you know in life.
Right. So, and just to clarify too, so you get in an argument with a police officer and police officer yells at you, that's not misconduct.
No.
You know?
And, we're looking for damages. Do you have damages? Were you arrested unlawfully and did you lose your job? Or
did you spend time in jail and
you
shouldn't have been in jail?
Yeah. Were you physically hurt? You have an injury. These are the kinds of things we're looking for.
Is this something that is common? Do you get a lot of these cases, or is there a lot going on?
We get a lot of calls.
It's more common than we would like it to be.
Yeah, yeah. My goal would be we never have to take a case like this ever again because we all get our shit together in life, right? But we get those calls way more often than we would ever like to. And we get a lot of jail case calls too.
But like Amy said, a lot of them, the civil rights violations and stuff that we would take on, and take to a trial and sue the state for are the ones where there's these big system failures where this could have been prevented. And it's not a mistake. A cop made a mistake.
Right.
And sometimes we can fix that mistake just by having a conversation with the police officer. Sometimes just one-on-one with the police officer or the boss. And I know Amy has talked to the police department and the solicitor's office, like, hey, you guys are doing this wrong. And if they're willing to say we are doing it wrong and we're going to do it right now, then the civil rights violation isn't worth that much if they're going to go ahead and fix it.
Yeah.
That's what we all want. That's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
And
well, Amy, isn't that so great that you do that? You don't have to do that. You don't have to go and show them the right thing.
And especially, I would say this across the country. Like, here's a great example of where we're getting it wrong, right? There is a man who has been charged with multiple horrific domestic violence and rape cases here in our county. And there are charges against him in California and another state where he has raped, beaten, and choked almost to death a woman, right? In multiple states. And no one will extradite him back to those states to be held accountable for that. And I was talking to a prosecutor yesterday and a police officer, and they said nobody will come and get him because we've got to get those, we can't take him. Those states have to come get him. And they won't come get him. And I said, does that not speak volumes to where we are as women in this country? That men who rape, strangle, and beat women they're not even worth coming to get to hold accountable.
Is there an explanation given for that? A reason for why they're not going to get him?
No, just we're not coming.
So weird.
But this is kind of what we see. They don't care enough.
Yeah.
So there's money to be had in these cases, but I think they're difficult because there are certain caps and you have to prove certain things. And so they are very difficult cases. So a lot of times you are taking them on just for the justice and the change. And so that's that's the heart of it. That's most of the time, this is not going to be the case you retire on. A civil rights case, but it's going to be the one that changes someone's life and the whole system potentially, and that's the goal.
Yeah,
that's 100% the goal. We also represent victims of sexual assault, just without police misconduct in general. But in those cases, we see that the police officers tasked with investigating sexual assault and domestic violence, they're not really trained. So, we see time and time again that entry level from being a road officer to an investigator, the first place they put you is the one place nobody wants to be. And you learn on rape cases, sexual assault cases. Not property crimes, but sexual assault cases. And those are the cases that you need the most training for. And, that's not where you go to off of, from DUIs in life.
Right,
so
right.
I have offered to police departments to bring in the lead trainer from the FBI who trains police departments across the country on sexual assault and domestic violence and how to deal with those, right, for the entire department. And some departments have taken me up on it and let me donate that time because it's just better for the plight of women in our area. And some police departments say no.
Wow.
And that's the most disheartening.
Yeah. I had no idea any of that was going on. And it sounds like you know a lot about the police training in general of what they cover and don't cover.
As a matter of fact, I just got a call last week that they have asked me to help create a criteria and an educational portion for the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy.
Good.
About sexual assault and domestic violence to help train officers. And because right now there's no...
Which would be so helpful because those cases are hard to pursue. And like Amy said, we do represent victims, not of the police, but just victims of sexual assault. And it's so hard to sit next to a victim when the police haven't done their job and they're, assailant, rapist, is getting away with what they did to them, and there's nothing that you can do as a victim's advocate. We can't force the prosecutor to prosecute. We can't undo the investigation or make it better so that this person would be convicted. And so you just have to help that individual person through that and just try to help them get over the fact that, you know, their rapist is out walking around, and hopefully it never happens again. So when you see a case where you can identify, you know, the police should have done this better, or this person could have done this better, and then this wouldn't have happened, that's where the civil rights stuff really comes into play.
Absolutely. So do you have any kind of tips for people who may have experienced some sort of civil rights violation?
Yeah, I would say call an experienced civil rights attorney immediately, because the preservation of that evidence is so important. Because, you know, body cam footage and car cam footage gets lost very quickly. And the preservation of that evidence and witnesses is super important. And so I say reach out to an attorney immediately who does these kind of cases, because
it's hard to undo a cover-up and a civil rights violation after it happens. So when these departments realize they did something wrong, they will, you know,
they start fixing it,
shuffling things around, they start fixing it, and then people get promoted and they don't end up talking, and that kind of stuff goes on. So the sooner you call a civil rights attorney to help you preserve all that and get to the bottom of it, the better.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about sexual assault type cases, I know sometimes those will linger for a while before they're ready to come forward. So the statute of limitations is 3 years that they have to come forward, right?
Well, that's on a civil case.
That's on a civil case.
Yeah. With criminal, there's no statute of limitations.
Okay.
But the evidence is
gone and lost.
Hard,
physical
Then
evidence
it's your
is
word
gone.
against his.
Right. That's good to know, though, that they could still come forward, you know.
Yeah, at any time.
You know, we're not talking about just sexual assault cases. We also see these cases in, like, jail cases. And, you know, we see wrongful death. That's a civil rights violation. You know, one of the cases here in Horry County that we've seen is the mentally ill lady who drowned. They were in the back of the car, and they drowned in the back of a sheriff's van during the hurricane.
How did she drown?
They went through a barrier and went through the water, and it overtook the van, and they drowned.
There's no way out of those vans when you're an inmate.
Shackled and chained. They couldn't get them out.
And did the driver get out?
And he tried to get them out, but the water had overtaken them. But that's also a civil rights violation. Like, why are we shackling and chaining, you know, women who have been, and putting them in cop cars, like in vans that are locked, and they're not under arrest?
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that's a civil rights violation because they think people are just in jail, and so you don't have any rights in jail, but you actually have a lot of rights in jail. And so that's the kind of stuff.
All your rights, those don't get checked at the door. And we see that also in jail suicide cases.
That is interesting, because I do think that you assume once you're in jail, you know, you don't have any rights. You kind of have to follow the rules of whatever they want you to do type thing. So that's interesting. Well, thank you.
Yeah, because especially with jail suicide cases, there's been warnings, right? We see them, but they get ignored. We've seen people make threats like, "I don't want to live. I'm gonna," and those comments and those notices are supposed to trigger events, right? They should be put into like an observation thing. No sheets, you know, so they can't hang themselves. These are the things that they should be doing, and they're just not. Yeah.
Interesting.
We can all do better.
Yeah. Well, thanks for shedding some light on this. I mean, this is great for me to know, too. I didn't know a lot of this was happening, so I appreciate you both for educating us on this, and hopefully we can make some changes, right? I appreciate all your work, Amy, that you're doing in the community. All right, you guys, thanks for watching this Carolina Justice Report episode. Of course, you can find them all here on YouTube and any other social media outlet that you use. You can find information about civil cases if they need to ask a question or anything like that with the lovely law firm. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. They are all over the place. They can also head online at justiceslovely.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
When life gets ugly, justice is love.